November 7th, 1944, 0540 hours, Kommerscheidt, Germany. The ruins of the barn were cold and damp, its stone walls cracked, rafters blackened from near misses in winter smoke. In what used to be the loft, with half the roof blown away, Corporal Daniel Webster Hail lay prone behind a pile of broken timbers, his cheek resting against a well-worn walnut stock. Every other man in Company G, 28th Infantry Division, carried a government-issue M1 Garand. Hail did not. The rifle under his hands was a Winchester Model 70, chambered in .30-06. It wore the scars of 8 years' hard use and careful modification. The barrel was a heavy, non-standard contour from a Pittsburgh machine shop. The stock had been reshaped and glass-bedded with marine epoxy, so the action and wood married perfectly. The trigger broke at 2 pounds with no creep. On top sat a Lyman Alaskan, 2.5 power scope, civilian glass built for elk hunters in the Rockies, not soldiers in the Hurtgen forest. The first sergeant had tried to take it away the day Hail joined the company in France. "This is not authorized equipment, soldier," First Sergeant Raymond Mitchell had said, fingers already curling around the rifle. "You'll turn it in and draw a proper weapon." Hail had pulled a folded letter from his pocket instead, a congressman's reply to a carefully written request back home. The wording was vague, barely more than a political courtesy, but it said, in black ink, that Corporal Hail was authorized to carry personal arms as supplementary equipment. Mitchell had scowled at the letter, scowled at the rifle, and decided he was too busy getting men ready for the line to fight Army bureaucracy in triplicate. Captain Robert Morrison, the company commander, had taken a simpler view. "If that farm boy can shoot," he'd said, "I don't care what he carries. If he can't, the Germans will solve our problem for us." Unspoken message: prove it or lose it. By early November, Daniel Hail had proved it, 43 times over. Every confirmed kill had been with that Winchester. Every one had been a single shot. Now, prone in the shattered barn loft, his crosshairs resting on the dark shape of a German regimental headquarters building 520 yards away, he had 48 hours to show what his backyard rifle could really do. Intelligence said that inside that structure were the men directing the defense of this entire sector: the regimental commander, his operations officer, intelligence officer, and several senior staff. 6 officers in all. 6 officers, 48 hours, and a farm kid from Pennsylvania with a rifle the Army hadn't wanted him to bring. Long before Kommerscheidt, long before anyone called it a toy or a threat to discipline, the Winchester was a farm tool. Daniel Hail grew up on a dairy farm outside Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The fields rolled gently, fences stitched the landscape, and groundhogs, woodchucks, as his father called them, were a constant problem. Groundhogs burrowed under fence lines and in pasture. Cattle stepped into their holes, snapping legs. Pasture ruined meant milk lost. In a family where every dollar mattered, that wasn't a nuisance. It was survival. At 12, Daniel's father handed him an old .22 and pointed toward the chewed-up hillside. "Ammunition costs money," he said. "Every shot should pay for itself. Don't waste any." At first, the boy missed as much as he hit. Groundhogs are wary. They pop up, look, and vanish at the slightest wrong sound or movement. But day after day, week after week, he learned. He learned to read the land, where burrow mouths were likely, how shadows crept in morning and evening, where rumples in the earth meant something was digging. By 14, he could hit a groundhog at 200 yards if the wind wasn't bad. By 16, 400 yards was not a lucky shot. It was the expected one. In 1938, on his 16th birthday, his father did something big. He took Daniel into town and handed over 89 precious dollars for a brand-new Winchester Model 70. It was more rifle than most boys would see in a lifetime. Daniel promptly took it apart. The factory barrel shot acceptably, but he wanted better. He saved wages from odd jobs and bought a custom heavy barrel from a machine shop in Pittsburgh. He learned from magazines and old-timers about bedding actions, then used marine epoxy to bed the Winchester into its stock so that the steel and wood mated without stresses. He smoothed the trigger until it broke at 2 pounds with no dry eyes. "Did I pull and no surprises?" And when a local shop got in a shipment of Lyman Alaskan scopes, he bought one too. A 2.5x scope meant for serious hunters who needed to see an elk clearly at dawn on a distant hillside. By 1942, when the draft notice came, his rifle was not a stock Model 70 anymore. It was an extension of his eye and his hand. He kept a spiral notebook of shots. Each entry had a date, distance, wind estimate, temperature, and where the bullet went. Over thousands of rounds, patterns became instinct. Drop at 300, 400, 500 yards. How a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind moves a 30 to 06 bullet at those distances. How heat shimmer lies to your eyes. How to hold your breath so the rifle settles between heartbeats, not across one. By then, 90% of his first shots at a man-sized target at 500 yards were hits. On paper, he was a farm kid with an expensive hobby. In reality, he'd quietly built himself into something far rarer. A precision marksman, long before the Army knew it needed one. When Pearl Harbor was bombed and America went to war, the draft board's letter to the Hail farm wasn't long in coming. At basic training in South Carolina, Daniel did exactly what the system expected, and then some. With an M1 Garand, he shot expert on the range. When instructors put him behind an M1903 Springfield at 600 yards, the old bolt gun and iron sights did not intimidate him. He put 8 rounds out of 10 into the black. The range officer watched through binoculars, then walked over. "Son," he said, "if this war lasts long enough, the Germans are going to learn to hate Pennsylvania farms." The Army noticed. On his records, there were notes. Excellent shot. Recommended for sniper duty. Natural range estimation. But institutional needs and timing are strange things. Instead of a formal sniper school slot, he was shipped to Europe in mid-1944 as a standard rifleman, assigned to the 28th Infantry Division's Company G. The Winchester, he decided, was coming with him. He wrote to his congressman, explained carefully, respectfully, that he had a personal rifle he believed would be valuable in combat. The reply that came back was non-committal but useful, a letter acknowledging that he would be allowed to bring supplementary personal equipment at his own responsibility. It wasn't a formal authorization, it wasn't doctrine, but it was ink. He packed the Winchester and 200 rounds alongside the standard issue. When he stepped into Company G's lines in August 1944, dusty from the march and still smelling faintly of the English Channel, First Sergeant Mitchell saw the unfamiliar rifle and immediately bristled. "This is not authorized equipment, soldier. Turn it in," he said. Hail handed him the congressman's letter. Mitchell stared at it, knew exactly how many forms and phone calls it would take to fight it, and made a field decision. "Ein," he growled. "You carry that, but you keep your Garand with you too, and when that toy gun gets you killed, don't expect me to shed tears." Captain Morrison took an even simpler line. "We've got bigger problems than one farm boy's hunting rifle," he said. "If it works, it works." 3 months later, the toy gun was the most feared single weapon in his company. The first chance to prove it in combat came on a miserable September day in the Hurtgen Forest. Machine gun fire tore into a line of American foxholes from about 350 yards away. The Germans had set up an MG-42 in a partly ruined farmhouse, its firing slit just a narrow black rectangle in a gray wall. Men in Company G had already gone down trying to get closer with grenades. Lieutenant Winters crawled back through wet leaves and mud to where Hail lay, rifle under his arm. "Corporal," he said, "can you hit that gun?" Hail inched forward until he could just see the target building between trees. Through the lineman's glass, the slit was small but clear enough. 350, maybe 370, he murmured. Little bit of wind right to left. He adjusted his hold a few inches into the breeze, exhaled, and let the crosshairs settle. The Winchester bucked gently. In the farmhouse, the MG-42 sputtered, then fell silent. A dark shape slumped sideways inside the slit. 6 seconds later, another German ran to grab the weapon. Hail fired again. The second man dropped over the gun. The forest was suddenly very quiet. The platoon moved. No more men died to that machine gun. From then on, every time someone could point to a distant threat, a sniper peeking from a church tower, an artillery observer standing too long on a hill, a machine gun that seemed just out of reach, the refrain became the same. Get Hail. Let the farm kid take a crack at it. The nickname toy gun faded. By early November, Hale's confirmed tally stood at 43 enemy soldiers killed, all between 200 and 700 yards, all with his Winchester, all with a single shot. In a regiment where most firefights were measured in magazines expended and grenades thrown, that was something new. It also meant that when intelligence reported a German regimental HQ operating out of a particular masonry building in Kommerscheidt, Captain Morrison knew exactly whose shoulder to tap. The building stood on the far side of the ruined town, a solid 3-story structure with thick walls and multiple windows facing toward American lines. Maps suggested it had once been a civil building, perhaps a school, perhaps an administrative office. Now it was the nerve center for the German regiment opposing them. Radio intercepts and prisoner statements indicated that 6 senior officers worked from there. The regimental commander, his intelligence and operations officers, and 3 other key staff. Destroying that HQ outright would be an obvious choice in another war. Call down heavy artillery and turn it into rubble. But Kommerscheidt still had civilians. Shelling the building might kill the officers, and a lot of non-combatants with them. It would also level parts of the town the Americans hoped to use. A direct infantry assault, building by building, would be costly and might fail entirely if German machine guns and reserves responded quickly. So Morrison summoned Hail to his command post. He pointed out the building through binoculars, then handed them to Daniel. "Range?" he asked. "About 520 from the ridge here to that 3rd-floor window," Hail said after a moment. "Clear line of sight from that ruined barn." He nodded toward the barn's hof. "If we knock out a bit more wall." "Can you hit anybody that shows at the windows from there?" Morrison asked. "Yes, sir. If they're dumb enough to show themselves," Hail answered. Morrison studied him. "You've got 48 hours, he said. "Every officer you can take out hurts their ability to coordinate. Just don't get yourself killed for bragging rights." Hail nodded, slung the rifle, and went to work. He moved into the barn's hof under cover of darkness. The barn had taken enough artillery and shell fire that much of its roof was gone. One wall had partially collapsed, opening a view toward the German lines. Hail took advantage of the ruin. He set up in the shadow of an intact rafter, several feet back from the opening. That way, any muzzle flash would be hidden from direct sight. All that might be visible from the German side would be a faint puff in darkness, easily lost amid the scarred walls. He built a stable rest from chunks of stone and broken beams, just high enough to allow a prone position with minimal silhouette. He spread a ground cloth to keep cold seeping into his bones. Then he lay down, checked his dope for 520 yards, bullet drop, wind drift, temperature, and waited. At 08:15 on November 7th, the first German officer walked into his crosshairs. 3rd floor, right window, gray tunic, papers in hand, turning slightly as he scanned the town. Hail saw the insignia, the bearing, the arrogance of someone who thought he was untouchable behind brick and distance. He settled his breathing. Inhale, exhale, half breath. The crosshairs stilled on the upper chest. He pressed the trigger straight to the rear. Through the scope, he saw the officer jerk, then disappear backward. Papers fluttered. A second later, someone yanked the curtain across the window. 1. At 10:43, another chance. 1st floor, left side. A major, by Hale's estimation, leaning too close to the glass, perhaps talking through shutters to a runner outside. The wind had picked up to about 8 miles per hour, pushing left to right, yards left to right wind. Hale knew exactly how far the bullet would drift. He held about 6 inches into the breeze from the intended impact point, compensated, and fired. The officer's head snapped sideways. The body dropped out of frame. 2. The Germans reacted faster this time. Curtains came down over every visible window. Movement behind the glass became mere shadows. Small arms and machine pistols stitched the ridgeline in long, nervous bursts. Some fire slapped into the barn itself, sending splinters and dust. All of it was too high, too erratic. They were shooting at ghosts. Hail didn't fire again that morning. He stayed still, watching through narrow gaps, learning their rhythm. At 14:20, a third opportunity arrived. An older officer, Hail guessed a lieutenant colonel from insignia and the careful way others moved around him, stepped briefly in front of a third-floor window, gesturing as he spoke to someone within. That gesture lifted his chest and shoulder into clear silhouette. Hale's finger took up the slack in the trigger. The rifle barked. The German's hand froze midair, then dropped, trailing, as his body crumpled. 3. That night, the Germans did the only thing left to them. They called in the artillery. They didn't know where he was. They only knew that somewhere along a certain ridge, in some ruin or tree line, an American sniper was killing their officers with single shots. They had counter-snipers of their own, but at 500-plus yards, with no repeatable muzzle flash, no obvious signature, they were guessing. So they resorted to something cruder, harassment barrages. From just after dusk until well after midnight, German artillery lobbed shells into anything that looked like a possible hide: barns, attics, standoff houses. Hail spent the night on his belly, teeth clenched, as the barn's hoff shook and dust cascaded from its rafters. Shrapnel punched new pockmarks into the walls, whined through gaps, and clattered to the floor. None of the rounds scored a direct hit. All were close enough to be educational. Cold wind knifed through the new holes in the walls. Hail wrapped his scarf tighter, pulled his cap down, and stayed where he was. Every shell they fired like this, he told himself, was one they weren't firing at his friends in the foxholes down the slope. He got a few minutes of sleep in snatches, cheeks still near the stock. By 05:40 on November 8th, he was back behind the glass. The valley was blanketed in a thick, even fog. It was perfect. Fog meant extra concealment for him. It also meant stable air, no strange thermals, minimal wind. Ballistics become simpler when nature stops changing the rules every minute. He watched curtained windows for hours. Caution can only be absolute for so long. At 07:10, a curtain on the ground floor twitched. An officer, probably new to the building, or desperate to see something other than four walls, pulled it aside to look out over the fog-shrouded town. Perhaps he was wondering when an expected counterattack would arrive. Perhaps he was just curious. From Hale's perspective, it didn't matter. He had been staring at that exact window so long that pickets in his eyes had adapted to every nuance. As soon as the curtain moved, his crosshairs were there. The man's face appeared, pale in the gray light. The rifle cracked. The head snapped back and down, disappearing. The curtain was yanked shut again. Whether by friend or gravity, he couldn't tell. 4. By now, everyone in that headquarters knew the building was cursed. But the regiment still had to function. Orders still had to be given. Liaisons still had to be run. Reports still had to be sent out and up. At 11:30, a new kind of target presented itself. A side door opened on the lower level, barely visible from Hale's position, but within the slice of view he'd chosen carefully the day before. An officer in field cap and long coat, insignia glimpsed as a Hauptmann or captain, stepped into the open and hurried toward a waiting Kubelwagen parked just 8 feet away. 4 seconds of exposure, 2 steps, 3, 4. Hale had anticipated this too. Headquarters, he knew from his own army experience, could not stay sealed indefinitely. Someone would eventually have to leave, to coordinate with other units, beg for artillery, argue with higher command. He swung the scope slightly, led the moving target by a fraction, and let the crosshairs drift just ahead of the man's chest before firing. The bullet took the officer high in the torso. Momentum carried his body forward 2 short steps before it folded onto the cobbles. The Kubelwagen's driver froze, then bolted back through the door without ever touching his keys. 5. And still, the biggest target had not shown himself. It happened late in the afternoon, at 16:45. A figure appeared near a third-floor window. The curtain was drawn only part way, enough for Hail to see an older officer, shoulders broader, chest full of ribbons, insignia on his collar that marked him as a colonel. More telling than his rank tabs was the way others moved around him. You can tell who's in charge, by the way. People create space without being told. The colonel stepped close to the glass, gesturing sharply at someone behind him, clearly giving directives about deployments, about withdrawals, about fire missions. He stayed in view for a full 10 seconds, an eternity compared to the fleeting glimpses Hail had learned to take or leave. Hail knew instantly that this shot mattered more than any other. He steadied the crosshairs on the man's upper chest at a point that would intersect heart and major vessels. Exhale, slack out of the trigger, press. The Winchester spoke. In the grainy circle of his scope, Hail saw the colo. O'Neill stiffen, then collapse as officers rushed in from both sides. Hands gestured frantically. One man threw his head back, shouting. Another began chest compressions that, from this distance, looked more like the empty motions of denial than medicine. A bandage flashed white. Nothing changed the fact that the man at the center of that scene moved no more. 6. No one else came to the windows after that. Within a day, the building was empty. The numbers looked almost absurd when written down. 6 shots fired, 6 officers killed, 0 American casualties, 0 civilians killed, 1 building left structurally intact. 24 hours after the colonel fell, German units vacated the headquarters entirely. The building had become, in the minds of its survivors, a death trap rather than a nerve center. They moved their command posts deeper, into basements and bunkers where glass and sunlight were replaced with concrete breeze blocks and candlelight. American intelligence, piecing together prisoner interrogations and captured documents over the following weeks, confirmed what Hail had suspected as he watched the colonel's last moments. The dead included the regimental commander, his operations officer, his intelligence officer, and 3 other key staff. In a modern headquarters, with deep staff benches and redundant systems that might have been survivable. In a battered German regiment in late 1944, already strained by replacements, fatigue, and shortages, it was not. Over the next days, American units in the Kommerscheidt sector noticed a clear shift. Enemy artillery became sporadic and poorly timed. Counterattacks that should have hit in synchronized waves arrived piecemeal, one company here, another there, easily defeated in detail. Units that should have mutually supported each other seemed blind to what their neighbors were doing. The Germans hadn't lost all their guns or all their men. They'd lost their brains. And that had been done not with a rolling barrage but with 6 shots from a modified farm rifle. Captain Morrison put it plainly in his after-action report, filed on November 10th. Corporal Hail's precision fire, he wrote, eliminated the effective headquarters staff of the enemy regiment in our sector with negligible collateral damage. This action significantly degraded enemy defensive coordination and materially assisted subsequent advances. It is recommended that Corporal Hail be recognized and that authorization be granted for continued employment of his non-standard weapon. Higher command listened, and then did what higher commands always do. They worried. The story of the farm boy and his backyard rifle traveled up the division ladder, shedding nuance as it went. Some saw a powerful example of initiative and ingenuity. Others saw a potential headache. If one private was allowed to bring a civilian rifle and turn it into a one-man precision weapon system, what would stop dozens from insisting on carrying all manner of unapproved gear? Aren't regulations written to prevent chaos, not invite it? At the top of the 28th Division, Major General Norman Cota received a thick packet, Hail's service record, Morrison's report, statements from other officers, rifle specifications. He chose to do something many higher commanders never bother with. He came to see the man and the rifle himself. In a damp field tent near the front, he picked up the Winchester, peered through the scope, worked the bolt. He asked Hail about his training, his firing logs, his choice of modifications. He asked Morrison whether integrating this one-off specialist had hurt unit cohesion or helped it. Then he made a decision that was, at its core, not about regulations, but about war. Hail would be allowed to keep the rifle. Cota put it in writing. The Winchester Model 70, serial number such and such, was authorized as specialized equipment for Corporal Daniel W. Hail, D. Designated Company G's Precision Marksman. There were conditions. Hail would still carry his standard M1 when operations required it. He would remain a member of his squad, not some glorified lone wolf. And importantly, he would make an effort to train others in the fundamentals of precision shooting. Daniel discovered quickly that some of what he did could be taught. He could teach soldiers not to jerk their triggers, to control their breathing, to build stable positions, to think about wind and distance rather than just center of mass, send it. But other things, the instinct to judge range by eye within 10 yards at half a kilometer, the ability to read a barely perceptible shimmer on grass as a change in wind, the patience to stay motionless for hours on end, were harder to transfer. You can give a man a decent rifle and good basics. You can't give him 12 years of shooting wary groundhogs on open fields in one winter of war. Still, the men he trained became better shots. Hits at 400 yards that had once been luck became routine. That alone was worth the time. As for the Germans, later prisoner interrogations from units who had been in or near Kommerscheidt give the other side of the glass. One captured Hauptmann, when asked about the headquarters engagement, said simply, "The American sniper made normal operations impossible. Officers could no longer approach windows to see where their own troops were. Commanders hesitated to stand near any opening large enough to frame a silhouette. The act of looking out to observe terrain, a basic, irreducible part of military leadership, became an invitation to death. They tried to hunt him, of course. They put their best marksmen on the ridge line with K98K rifles and 4-power scopes. They watched likely windows and doors. They studied smoke patterns and muzzle flashes. Hail's range, over 500 yards, was already at the upper edge of their practical doctrine. Their rifles and training could reach, but with less precision than they were used to, and his patience defeated their expectations. He did not fire strings of shots from one position. He did not take marginal opportunities. He fired once. Then he became part of the rubble. His hide in the barn loft was well enough back from the opening that his muzzle flash was not visible from the front. His rifle was suppressed only by distance and discipline, not by hardware, but that was often enough. Dust signature was minimal in a ruin already coated in powder. Without a repeatable pattern to latch onto, German counter-snipers were guessing. So they did what frightened men behind big guns have always done. They called for more shells. Those harassment barrages, recorded in American reports as a nuisance and in German logs as necessary protective fire, did not kill the sniper. They did, however, burn through ammunition and contribute nothing to breaking American lines. In a subtle way, Hail's presence was a kind of artillery sink, drawing fire away from other targets. By May 1945, when the war in Europe ended, the numbers beside his name were stark. 78 confirmed enemy soldiers killed. Every kill with the Winchester. Everyone with a single shot. No recorded misses. No second shots into the same man. In a conflict of massed fire and prodigious waste, a farm-built precision instrument had quietly run on a different economy. One shot, one result. After the war, the Winchester Model 70 went home to Pennsylvania in a duffel bag rather than a display case. It came out of that bag, was oiled, and went back into service in the same fields where it had grown up, killing groundhogs instead of officers, protecting cattle legs instead of infantry lives. In 1963, the Army Ordnance Museum wrote to Daniel Hail. They wanted the rifle. They wanted to put it behind glass with a plaque about Kommerscheidt, 6 shots, and the birth of modern designated marksman ideas. Hail declined. "It's my working rifle," he wrote back. "A tool, not a museum piece." He died in 1987, having farmed the same land for decades. The Winchester passed to his son. To this day, it is said, it still comes out when something needs a single sure shot across a Pennsylvania field. In later interviews, when asked how he felt about his wartime record, Daniel avoided heroics. "I did what was necessary," he said. "War makes necessary what would be crimes in peace. Every German I shot was somebody's son. They were enemies because war made them enemies, not because they were evil." His story carries several truths that reach beyond one man, one rifle, one town. Innovation in war often comes from unexpected places. From farmers, machinists, hunters, tinkerers. People whose civilian lives taught them skills the manuals never mention. Rules and regulations are important, but they are tools too. When they prevent effective action, they need to bend. Captain Morrison's willingness to let a private keep a toy gun, and General Cota's decision to make it officially acceptable, were acts of flexibility that doctrine alone would have strangled. And sometimes, the most effective weapon on the battlefield isn't the one a government factory stamped with an ordnance code. It's the one a kid built in a barn, shot day in and day out until it became part of him, and then refused to give up, even when everyone in uniform told him it didn't belong. They mocked the farm boy's backyard rifle. Then, over 48 hours in a ruined German town, it took out 6 officers, shattered an entire regimental headquarters, and helped open a path for American troops with 6 calm, careful, unapproved shots. After that, the laughter stopped. The lessons did not.